having traveled and being able to study, and more importantly, meeting people and understanding like where they come from and just really investing yourself into people's stories kind of wanted me interested in economic development. For me, though, I don't, I didn't grow up in an infrastructure, professionally in the field. So a lot of times my development comes in terms of, or my support for development comes in the form of national security type things like defense articles or training or those kind of things, because that's what I did. But when you look at the development pillars, governments, economics, and security, those are the three that make a nation strong. Mm-hmm. And so I feel that I can make a difference around the world, because if you're able to transfer a way of doing things or technology and then they make it their own, I think that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And could you describe a little bit of like what your nonprofit currently does right now?
Yeah, so I joined the Veterans Cannabis Project about a year ago. So in one of the consulting activities, I worked with a company called Navigators Global. They're a strategic communication company located in Washington, D.C., where I live. And so one of the gentlemen that I worked with, Doug DeStasso, he and another gentleman named Nick Etten, they're actually the founders of the Cannabis Project. Doug has moved on, but Nick is on an advisory role now to the Veterans Cannabis Project. But they asked me if I wanted to be the managing director. So that's the position that I hold right now. Helping veterans is something that's very important to me. When I was a commanding officer, I was a very steadfast supporter of what they call the Wounded Warrior. Not the Wounded Warrior, but the Returning Warrior initiative, where folks that were coming back from deployments were able to talk and go through their stories. That's what started me doing that. And then having retired, talking about my transition stories when I was at another nonprofit called the Global Special Operations Forces Foundations. One of the pillars, or one of the 5 things that organization liked to do, was helping veterans transition from the military into civilian life. And that was something that I did because I took my transition out of the military very seriously, right? And not to say that other people don't take it seriously, but it was a very calculated 18-month project for me to be able to set me up for the day that I retired, I would have something to walk into. And so that support for veterans was extremely important to me. When I worked in artificial intelligence and biotech during that time, one of the things that we talked about was developing new types of therapeutics or treatments to help like PTSD, and the power of repurposing drugs or making new drug combinations it just enhance it with the power of artificial intelligence. And in doing so, and working in that field, I helped to begin the process of getting approvals for a clinical trial for a drug that we had developed. Being in that world is absolutely, biotechnology is absolutely fascinating, especially in a small business setting, because it is scrappy. You do have to, there's like first mover advantage. You're moving fast and you're raising money. You're spending money, but you're raising money. And sometimes it works, most times it doesn't. But if you ever get a chance to work up in a startup experience, I would do so. But getting back to your question, being in that progressive therapeutic lane and drug discovery and developing new treatments for things that are affecting people, for instance, like maybe traumatic brain injuries, I believe that they felt that I would be a good steward for the Veterans Cannabis Project. And so I took it over as part raising money. A lot of it is advocacy. So we raise money to raise the issue of developing as making cannabis as a as a treatment alternative to opioids, allowing veterans to have access to it, even in states where cannabis, medical cannabis, or even recreational cannabis is free. If you're a veteran, your access to it or being able to prescribe or recommend treatments to it is not there available to you. And if there's anything that I could do to help extend that conversation, because I do believe that it is just much like a diversity and equity inclusion issue. I think veterans fall in that lane because there's a finite number of people in this country that have served in that way that are now retired. And you should take care of people who serve their communities and their country at the end of it. And so that is the issue that I took up with the Veterans Cannabis Project.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of fundraising and all that stuff, what skills do you think have been essential in doing that you've learned from previous experiences?
Oh yeah, that is not easy, right? My first job in the nonprofit realm was with, like I said, with the Global Special Operations Forces Foundation. And you have to get people to believe, one, and you have to be super passionate about what you're doing. I think a lot of times I've seen a lot of people who start nonprofits and they get to a certain point, they want to pass it on to somebody else. And you can't do that because they will never have the passion that you started it for a reason. And that's what I saw at the at GlobalSoft is what we call it, is just pure passion for a particular subject, right? And in that, when you talk to folks, you have to get them, they have to be early adopters to your dream. But there's one thing to get a donation and say you're going to do something, but it's another thing, especially when you're creating a professional association or an organization that convenes communities. There has to be a net benefit from that donation because you're going to pay salaries, you're going to pay wages, you're going to have benefits. All that has to mean something because this person isn't going to stroke $100,000 check and not have anything in between unless they wanted to just give it. And that's very few. Organizations join other organizations for positioning. Now maybe that is a little bit cynical view of it. Is very true, especially when it comes to a business or somebody that's, we weren't raising money just to it's like, I'm not raising money necessarily to just, cure a sick kid of a disease, you know what I'm saying, or something, or put a leg on a soldier. This is, we were creating a nonprofit professional association, which means it's a convening activity, which means it advocates for the community, but at the same time, industry that wants to get, but individual donors actually give the most per year. There is a gentleman that I met, his name was Joe Musselman. He started the Honor Foundation, and his ability to raise money is incredible. And my boss told me, he's like, you need to talk to him. So I went and talked to him. And he told me about this book. He told me about a book, and forgive me if I get the name wrong, but I think it was called Strike Zone, and it was about a baseball player. And I think he was like the highest, he had the highest batting average of any professional baseball player. And I believe he played for the Cubs, or he may have played for the White Sox because Joe's from Chicago. But he says, his strategy is you wait for a pitch in your pitch. If you get a pitch, between here and here for your body type, if you swing at any ball coming through that strike zone, then you're going to make contact, and your percentages of getting on base is going to be a lot higher. So it's about being patient. It's about seeing a fundraising target, be patient about it, and then when you have your opportunity, you swing away, and then you just be super passionate about it. I don't think there's anything that can teach you that. You just got to kind of do it and get no's in your face 1,000 times. But I would say for any founder of a nonprofit, stay within your nonprofit purely as long as you possibly can, that has to be, if you're fortunate enough to make it your focus, like you don't have another job that you go to, because really to make a successful organization, it becomes a 24/7 endeavor. You know what I mean? And it's a lot of hard work, but when it's done, you know that you're really making a difference. But fundraising is key. And so for your particular activity, it's important to know who your audience is, who you're serving, and if somebody were to, I mean, we're talking about big dollars, if somebody were to stroke you a very large check, they may ask for something in return. So just be prepared.
Yeah, I know what you said. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, because you want them to stroke the check more than once, because you have to do it again next year.
Yeah.
So you got to add value. You have to add value for somebody to stroke a check that's greater than $100,000.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say that, like, it's kind of about like their positioning as well, like what you said earlier, how that's gonna look for their company, how that's gonna reflect on them. Did you say that's true?
Yeah, because the problem is like people move all the time. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a good lead within a particular organization, guess what? That person's probably going to take another job. Mm-hmm. So now you have to, and if you're not adding value to the organization, now you got to go in and meet everybody all over again if you don't remain close to that particular company, because individuals are moving jobs all the time. So you could have had a donor that donated 3 years in a row, 80,000, 80,000, 80,000. And then that one person, you lost your one advocate. So now you have to get thick with an organization so people know who you are. So they're just going to program that check regardless of who's sitting in a seat. That is hard. That is hard, but that is what's needed, especially if your number one revenue side is from other corporations. Because they're not going to stay.
Mm. And just circling back to the specific nonprofit that you're in right now, it's Veterans for Cannabis. What's the specific connection between like cannabis and how that helps veterans?
Yeah, so a lot of times for me, so treatment options is very limited, especially, or if they suffer from chronic pain, you get a lot of opioids as prescribed by doctors, right? And so what happens is, and you've read in the news or saw in the news of opioid epidemic, is very dangerous, right? And a lot of people have a lot of issues, or if there's depression. What has come out of it is there's a lot of good scientific work that has been done on cannabis, but it doesn't necessarily have like the clinical, call it the clinical rigor. A lot of it is, what I would say is like a lot of peer-to-peer interaction and not enough like scientific interaction about it. And the VA, the Veterans Affairs organization, is very, there's a lot of veterans that are a part of the VA system. I believe there's like 9 million, I believe, right? And you have to be very careful on how you are taking care of your patients. I'm not a doctor, but this is what I imagine. And so when this person is complaining about, this, that, these ailments, then there's only, because if you're a VA doctor, there's a limited scope on treatment options that you can have, even though there's positive and efficacy for cannabis throughout a lot of what people are having problems with post their service, right? And so what happens is they our particular focus is, one, to advocate for veterans for a greater range of treatments to include cannabis. And that requires one, engagements on with Congress and your senators to be able to want to write laws to be able to increase the studies, the medical studies on those fees, so they can be able to increase that aperture and be able to prescribe or at least recommend treatments, which they can do even if they don't know anything about it themselves. And at the current state, they cannot. And so it's about pain, right? It's about relieving pain, and where people can remain healthy, remain productive and be good, in good to their families. And so that's, for me, that's a very worthy cause. And so that's what I try to do. So I try my best to raise money so we can continue that advocacy, continue to have that conversation, but at the same time, be able to connect. Because even if it doesn't go through, which is a low probability, it's just going to take a while. But if we are convening those people and they're connecting, at least there's something to say, to be able to talk with issues within groups. And so we're providing that connectivity, both of what's going on at the federal level to individuals and then to industry that are actually creating these new treatments that right now the VA can't touch.
So I guess it's kind of like a multifaceted issue. There's a problem of, not having enough funding for the research and creating new treatments, but also a problem of like increasing access to cannabis, and as opposed to, opioids.
Yeah. The funding is creating treatments is good, right? I mean, if there's not enough incentive right now because it's very expensive to run a clinical trial with thousands and thousands of patients, and there's different phases in studies that need to be done, right? In a clinical setting, right? With placebos and all these things, there's a whole ton of rules to it. And it's very expensive, but you have to see the upside, for it. As a corporation, you have to see the upside. Well, one of the greatest incubators for these things in Korean industry is the government. The government, when you look at like technology development or global positioning, things that make things work today, like the Internet of Things, the seed capital for those particular activities was the U.S. government. You know what I mean? I mean, it wasn't like the companies were going out and said, hey, we need to be able to create this. What has happened, though, is the consumer market in terms of those technologies have taken off. So companies have choices now between making hundreds of millions of dollars versus making billions of dollars. You know what I'm saying? But, positioning things, the government, has been the start of like things like the Silicon Valley that was started by the government. You know what I'm saying? And of course, it just took off from there. Not naive to why businesses exist, and it's to make money. But sometimes there needs to be an incentive for businesses to invest in certain types of activities. And not only, so I think it's a cannabis therapeutic issue, right? Period. Right? That could benefit veterans. I don't think it's unique. I think the pain points and the PTSD are affect millions of Americans, right? It is a pain issue, right? And what are the therapies and the progressive therapies that can relieve those pains? And veterans happen to be a part of that particular segment of the population that is suffering from pain, and there's not very good alternatives, especially plant-based alternatives. And so that's what it's about. So I think that's the issue, not veterans with pain. It's just pain. You know what I mean? And so I'm just highlighting the veterans piece of it.
Yeah, because I guess that's where you kind of come in, and so it aligns with your story.
Yep, it does.
And then just my last question, what is your vision for the future in terms of veterans' access to medical cannabis and the ability to research it more thoroughly to serve veterans' health needs?
Good question. I think we've got a long way to go. I think there are provisions where the government, where Congress has said the VA can't penalize doctors for steering a patient to a certain way, or they can't expend money to. It's kind of complicated when you read law, but it's about not being able to spend the money in order to prevent a doctor to do something, right? So you still can't, and even in states where you have a right to, they just can't stop you from doing that, or your fear of losing your benefit because you self-medicate with cannabis. I think those fears are gone, but even then, I still think it's hearsay. It's like you're running a very tight rope here between what is ground truth, what is your right, and then what people just kind of just they don't prosecute, they just turn the other way. Who knows, right? I think the future of veterans cannabis, I think a bill that requires additional research directed by the VA is extremely important. So that'll get the studies done in the clinical trial within the clinical setting. And then you actually have pilot programs where you're using it and measuring it in a trial setting with dosage and a recommend and with dosage controls, and I think it moves from there. But more importantly, I think Congress has a very, I think Congress has a very a long lead time is to descheduling and decriminalizing cannabis. I think that around like 2025, 2026 maybe, and I think that it'll start moving more rapidly. Um, the multi-state operators, MSOs, are keen. They're great supporters of the VCP in terms of donated dollars to help support veterans anyway, and they see this as a good opportunity to, you know, get out of the business of just being a novelty place to go, when you're old enough, but more of a place that you can go and seek out and to help things like anxiety, sleep, exercise, digestion, all those kind of holistic plant-based activities, but have the mystery taken out of it, where you can read a label or somebody can be like, these is how many milligrams that you can want to do. Anything more than that, it's not going to help your body. That would be fantastic in my view.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. No, thank you for your time. This is a very insightful conversation. A lot of help.
No, it's good. It was good. I appreciate you being considering me for to be interviewed. It's an honor. It's great to see you again. And then just best of luck. And if you ever need anything, you have my information. Just reach out.
Awesome. Thank you for this. Really, thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem. Take care.
Thank you, you too. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Make sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you ever want to contact me about anything regarding the channel, you can contact me at themaggiewalkerproject@gmail.com. It'll also be linked in the description. So with that, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.